I've made little to no reference at all to the so-called crisis that's going on just now for two reasons mainly. On the one hand, if there is any truth to the seriousness of the virus in regards to how it affects people with respiratory issues and whatnot, then my mother's a high risk target, as my mother's disabled, and of course I've also got an elderly grandmother. So on the one hand I'm concerned about that, but I've always thought that there's something quite odd with what's going on just now. I didn't particularly want to put out content where I didn't fully believe in the narrative that was on display, because it would have just come across as disingenuous, while simultaneously not wanting to put out content that could be considered conspiratorial, because I didn't really have anything to go on. The only reference that I actually made to this at all was a video in January where I put the article up that everybody seems to be talking about now, Event 201, and it's got people thinking that this was the precursor to an actual epidemic or a pandemic. Really starting to wonder to myself if this in fact is Event 201, so to speak. Because it definitely, for example, could be attributed to a serious case of influenza that broke out in December time and has now subsequently spread. That combined with the fact that the way that they tried to play down the seriousness of this virus, mild symptoms, it's just bizarre. I thought it was bizarre from day dot, and I still do now. And the authoritarian measures that are taking place for a virus that only last week the government had downgraded. As of 19th of March 2020, COVID-19 is no longer considered to be a high consequence infectious disease. The Four Nations Public Health Group made an interim recommendation to classify COVID-19 as an HCID. This was based on consideration of the HCID criteria about the virus and the disease with information available during the early stages of the outbreak. But now that more is known about COVID-19, the public health bodies in the UK have reviewed the most up-to-date information about COVID-19 against the UK criteria and have determined that several features have now changed. In particular, more information is available about mortality rates, and there is now greater clinical awareness on a specific and sensitive laboratory test, etc. The Committee on Dangerous Pathogens are also of the opinion that COVID-19 should no longer be classified as an HCID. And of course, then they go on to say, the need to have a national coordinated response remains, however, but this has been met by the government's response. But if you are openly admitting that you've downgraded it, why are you still acting as if you haven't? More talk seems to be emerging from globalists like Gordon Brown and arseholes in America, talking about big government to save the day. You know, this is from Jeff Sensert's The Economist. Big government is needed to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. It may not shrink again afterwards. Are covering Britain and America this week. Everything's under control. Big government, liberty in the virus. I mean, look at the photo. Just pure fucking mockery. But some think that the borders are still open because our governments are more obsessed with the idea of globalism than putting the safety of their own people first. Or maybe it's because there isn't a problem at all. I don't know. But I do think it's a bit strange that the actions as of late, especially in Scotland, the outbreak starts in England, Nicola Sturgeon does nothing, waits for it to come to Scotland, and in numbers, in comparison, Scotland has still not seen levels near England yet. Not to suggest that it won't occur, but until such times as it does, I don't think a complete shutdown was necessary. Talk of how we will never be the same again after COVID-19. Things will never be the same again. Life will never be the same again. All this talk about the economy potentially crashing. All this talk about depression, etc. And then on the Sunday Politics Scotland show, we have some woman who I presume is an expert. I can't recall. Some expert on something, I don't know. Who mentions two key industries that, in an ideal world, that may not recover come the end of this outbreak. And it just so happens that these two key industries that she mentions are the exact same key industries that the United Nations, Thin Lips, and all these other Greenpeace socialists who pretend that climate change is an imminent threat want to close down. I'll let her speak for herself, of course. Where are my manners?
Example is retail, which was under extreme pressure because of internet sales anyway. Obviously, supermarkets are doing fantastically well out of this. Amazon, fine. But if you're, a retailer on the high street that isn't primarily doing internet sales, there must now be surely question marks about how much our high streets can ever come back.
Yeah, definitely. Traditional retail is certainly one of the areas that we might see long-term impacts. It was already struggling, as you say, and it does seem likely that there are going to be some shops that, probably will not reopen, given they were already struggling quite a lot. But it might not just be traditional retail. The oil and gas industry is likely to be struggling quite a lot just now. And it might be that sort of hastens the decline.
Because Saudi Arabia flooded the market, but let's just blame the coronavirus.
Of that industry in Scotland.
They would be affected.
Coronavirus seems to be doing a lot of things.
Presumably, Mary, by the collapse in oil prices as well, because the North Sea oil and gas is relatively high cost to produce, isn't it, compared to other areas of the world? And it's a bit like with fracking in America. The more the price drops, the less competitive it becomes.
Absolutely. And I think, at the current level of the oil price, a lot of the production in Scotland isn't really terribly viable. And that obviously has impacts on particular areas of the country. So one of the other things we've been looking at is what particular parts of Scotland might be affected in different ways. And so whilst obviously things like the hospitality industry, pubs and restaurants, eventually will reopen, one of the questions is, are there particular parts of the country where there are businesses that won't reopen because of the crisis and how long the shutdowns had to be?
And what's the conclusion? Are there particular areas?
Yes, so particularly rural areas of Scotland where things like tourism and hospitality.
They keep talking about tourism and hospitality, but if you recall, it wasn't that long ago that they brought out their tourism and hospitality agenda, all about normalising mass migration into the countryside, into secluded towns, under this guise of giving tourists the whole benefit of Scotland. So they're not just stuck in the cities, they can go wherever they want and experience Scotland as a whole. And now they keep talking up the need for money and funding, etc., to be pumped into the tourism and hospitality sectors come the end of said crisis, quote unquote, because other industries might not survive. So they're trying to normalise this shit while this is occurring. And I wish people would stop calling it a crisis. Boris Johnson, Nicola Sturgeon, all of them, they stood there and waited for this to occur, whatever it is. Anyway.
They are large parts of the economy. We would be worried about those areas in particular. Some of these communities are had a difficult outlook for things like demographic change, ageing population.
Demographic change, you mean going from native Scot to immigrant, yeah? What are you doing about it? You just want more migrants, of course. The coronavirus is affecting areas of the country that are experiencing demographic change. Oh, well then.
Keeping their young people in the area anyway, and now we would be worried about the impact on these areas in the long term. This is why it's these areas that rely on social spending that are really going to take the brunt. Yes, you're right, people aren't going to go and buy 20 coffees on their first day back at work or anything like that to make up for the fact that they haven't been at work for a while. There might be other long-term effects on the economy. We're all working from home now and working more flexibly. So it'll be interesting to see how much of this kind of persists into the economy as it gets back on its feet.
You want to just remind people and underline why these rules are in place. It is because they are vital. Staying at home, more than any other single measure, is the way in which we can support and protect our NHS, and it is ultimately the way in which we can all contribute to saving lives.
Because it's incumbent on all of us to take responsibility. It's our responsibility now. The task is on us, because these people couldn't be fucked to close the borders. So now it's our responsibility. It's our problem now because these people didn't close the borders. But however...
Once again, we've seen the number of confirmed cases in Scotland rise, and very sadly the number of deaths again has risen. You're
being disingenuous, though, aren't you? Because how many of these deaths are people that had other issues? They don't seem to tell you that information. They just keep linking every single person that is dying to the coronavirus. You waited for this to come here. Even now, people can still climb on a plane and come to the UK. So you expect all of us to self-isolate, quote unquote, with the police stalking you if you have the audacity to go out more than fucking once. But yet the borders are open. Why? Is it because this is all shit? Is it because globalism takes precedence? Or is it because this is the beginning of authoritarianism forevermore? I don't fucking know. But I'm not going to take this as seriously as they want me to until they start acting the way that they should be. Anyway.
I've said before, this of course is a very significant underestimate of the number of cases in Scotland, and we're
because we've got computer generations that are never ever right, but we still refer to them.
Probably looking at of the order of perhaps 40 to 50,000.
Because a computer told you. A computer has generated a number of 40,000 to 50,000 people that are estimated to have the virus. You don't know that for a fact, a computer told you, but what do? You stand at your fucking podium, you spew it out anyway, and it becomes the talking point of the day. The way that the media have been acting, and the way that so many of these politicians have been acting as of late, with their ridiculous advice and their carefully crafted speeches where they never actually say anything that could be considered an incitement to fear, but you come away with that impression at the end anyway. You know, they tell you not to panic, but they've just spent the last half hour subtly implying panic. And we get shit like this on a daily basis. It's just fear porn central. But if the majority of people are supposedly going to get this, and the majority of people will only experience mild symptoms, then calling it a deadly virus and whatnot, rather uncalled for, don't you think? As I said, I've not made videos on it because I don't really know what to make of it. But there's something not right with what's going on. I think that's something we can all agree on.